Over the last couple of years, Riot has launched multiple attempts to artificially link games. Is this purely for esports? I can understand how games can be more enjoyable past 30-minute mark. We don't try to artificially lengthen the game, as far as I know. We're actually very, very concerned with changes that we do that could make games too long. That's like many of the things we do, an anti-goal is the game has gotten meaningfully longer on average. And so often when we do changes that potentially could lengthen a game, like say like it's easier to come back or whatever, we'll often like try to think about pairing them with changes that also can potentially shorten the game in other ways. And so it's kind of a thing where it's like, as an example, durability does not necessarily mean the game goes longer. Durability means fights play out longer, but that doesn't necessarily exactly correlate with the game going longer. And if we were finding meaningful increases in our average game time, we're like, as a crazy example, we ship the durability patch and average game time increases by 5 minutes. That's a lot, by the way. That's a lot. Like, again, hyperbolic example, it's very likely the team would work to then pull that back. Because we generally agree with you that, like, we're not trying to make every game go 40 minutes long. Generally, the thought with League of Legends, like, game length is that you need enough time for the game to, like, have a story to it and have a build-up to it. And then either, like, a winning team needs to conclude the game, or there needs to be a comeback. We don't like trapped games, which is the idea that you're like in a game that you can't win, but you can't get out of. Like if you're in a game that you really can't win, like the game should end. And so that's something we watch out for and are careful about. And then like, we don't want to eliminate long games, like 60-minute games. We just want to make sure that like the reason you're getting to a long 60-minute game is, you know, feels like it was a compelling story of how that game got there with like a lot of back and forth, and it's not just you stuck in every game. And then on the flip side of things, in terms of short games, there is an amount of game time that's too short. We don't want the game to be in a spot where it feels like games resolve super quickly in a way that like there was no story of how the game developed and there was no back and forth. And so we've definitely tested sometimes changes that meaningfully shorten game times in ways that end up being very negative. So it's a smooth balance between what is the exact right spot, and you don't want it too long or too short. What are my thoughts on Hit TEEMO in this current state of the game? This is a personal opinion. I don't know how true it actually is. Personal opinion. I am somewhat concerned about the AP ratio nerf on Nashor's Tooth. I have a feeling that ratio is fairly load-bearing for enabling AP-based auto attack patterns. And so I wonder if Nashor's Tooth is supposed to have that AP ratio and then like just like have less AP on it. Because it's like the ratio is to convert your other AP items, right? It's there to be like, hey, auto attacks aren't that good with AP, but bro, Teemo, if you build this, your auto attacks will get better with AP or somebody else. And so my worry about it is that if it doesn't have a good enough ratio, it might end up in a spot where only like the really, really skewed towards AP auto attacking characters can actually make that pattern work. Like the characters like Kayle and Gwen as an example. That would be like my worry. Don't know if it's true. But it's just a question of how load-bearing is that AP ratio for making patterns that aren't perfectly optimized for AP auto-attacking work. Is there a way to make Teemo Shrooms more consistent and reliable in a game so full of sweeping methods? It's difficult because we can do that, but that's also kind of messed up. Like, Teemo Shrooms like need to be sweepable to be like fair. But then when they're sweepable, it feels like he's non-functional at times, so it's like a hard balance. Why Dongle? Thank you for the 1 month. Appreciate it. I think probably the best way to do it would be maybe just make his mushrooms a bit stronger in combat, maybe. So if you have some mushrooms, you could still like have him prime really fast. Like, I don't know, like as an example, what if his mushroom throw was just faster missile speed and less arm time, right? And it's like, well, you can put traps around, but if someone sweeps out all your traps, you can still just chuck a... My words. You can put traps around, but if someone sweeps your traps, you can still just chuck a shroom right at their head, right? Like, that's something you could consider. Has the current League engine been too outdated for stuff you wanted to do for champions? No, nowadays I don't feel that way. It used to be. So originally, when I first started working at League, you really had to negotiate hard to get an engineer to give you tech for things you wanted to do. And so you'd make a lot of decisions purely based not on like what is the, number one, anything goes, do whatever you want. You make a lot of decisions on like what is the lowest engineering resources. And so some spells you'd be like, I want to make a cool spell, of course, but what cool spells I can make without asking the engineer to make it for me. Nowadays, we have a lot more engineering resources dedicated to making like just crazy stuff for champions if needed. So it's definitely a different situation from when I first started at Riot. Where it's like, as an example, I once had Jinx grenades that lit brush on fire. And one of the reasons we didn't do it was we didn't really have the engineering resources to be able to detect the brush and light it on fire and make that whole process look good. And so even though I hacked together something that was testable with an invisible network of teamos, we didn't have what we needed to make it. My brain. We didn't have what we needed to make it good from an engineering perspective, and so it was kind of like it doesn't matter that this is cool. This just isn't the time to do it, and so we moved on. And it doesn't mean we never did like crazy stuff, right? Like, even though I'm saying Jinx didn't get tech for that, Jinx got tech for other things. As an example, when we were making Jinx, you couldn't increase the speed of missiles that were in the air. So Jinx got tech to increase her ultimate speed. Another thing that you couldn't do when we made Jinx is you couldn't make missiles beyond a certain speed, actually. So you know how Jinx's W is really, really, really fast? It used to be that if you made a missile as fast as Jinx's W, it would go through champions. Like, it wouldn't actually be able to update fast enough with how far it was traveling to, like, reliably hit champions. And so I got engineering resources to make Jinx's W really fast. And so it's not like we couldn't get engineers back then. We just had less available engineering resources and generally had to be a bit more conservative with the things we were doing. Has Riot ever thought about just completely rebuilding the game in an updated engine? No. So there's always this question of why don't just delete the game and make it from scratch? And you have to understand that with a game that is big and insanely large as League of Legends, just in terms of all the interactions, like a lot of the reason people say, hey, just delete the game is like, then you'll have not spaghetti code and there won't be bugs and all this. It's like, well, just the act of like completely remaking it from absolute scratch is going to make bugs. Because all those fine-tuned interactions that we've already got working, we'd have to remake, right? And so, we're constantly updating and improving the League engine, but that is very, very, very different from and delete it all and start over, right? That's generally not a good idea in software dev to do that. Because as much gains as you get from starting fresh, you lose in terms of work that needs to be made to create it anew and all the potential new bugs and interactions and problems that would pop up.